Hashtag the hook. The desert sand turned crimson beneath her boots as explosions thundered across the Afghan hillside. While seasoned Navy SEALs took cover behind rocky outcrops, their eyes weren't on the enemy positions ahead. They were watching the petite woman in military fatigues who had just stepped into what would become the most intense 13 minutes of combat any of them had ever witnessed. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had spent 3 years treating wounded soldiers in field hospitals, her hands skilled at suturing wounds and administering medications. But on this scorching afternoon in Helmand Province, those same gentle hands would grip an M4 rifle and change everything the elite Special Forces unit thought they knew about courage under fire. What happened next would not only earn Rodriguez the combat medical badge in record time, but it would also force the most elite warriors in the U.S. military to reconsider their assumptions about who belongs on the front lines of America's wars. This is the true story of 13 minutes that redefined heroism and proved that sometimes the most unexpected person becomes exactly the warrior you need when everything goes wrong. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Chapman as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez checked her medical supplies for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced precision through the trauma kit, counting bandages, checking medication expiration dates, and ensuring every piece of equipment was exactly where it should be. At 5 feet 4 inches tall with dark hair pulled back in regulation style, Rodriguez didn't look like someone who would soon be making military history. Born in El Paso, Texas, to a family where military service was a tradition spanning 3 generations, Rodriguez had always known she would serve her country. Her grandfather fought in Vietnam, her father served in the Gulf War, and her older brother was currently stationed in Germany. But while the men in her family chose combat roles, Rodriguez felt called to heal rather than hurt. She enlisted as a combat medic, driven by a desire to save lives rather than take them. Her journey to this remote Afghan outpost had been anything but conventional. After completing her medical training at Fort Sam Houston, Rodriguez was initially assigned to a field hospital in Kandahar. For 2 years, she worked 12-hour shifts treating everything from routine injuries to life-threatening trauma cases. Her superiors noted her exceptional composure under pressure and her ability to make critical decisions quickly, traits that would soon prove invaluable in ways no one could have predicted. The transfer to Forward Operating Base Chapman came suddenly. The base's regular medic had been injured in an IED explosion, and Rodriguez was the only available replacement with the necessary clearance level. What made this assignment unusual was that Chapman primarily supported Navy SEAL operations, and Rodriguez would be the first female medic to work directly with these elite units. Lieutenant Commander James "Hawk" Harrison had been less than enthusiastic about the arrangement. A 15-year SEAL veteran with multiple deployments under his belt, Harrison commanded respect through his calm leadership and tactical brilliance. He had worked with many medics over the years, but always men who had trained specifically for special operations support. The idea of integrating a female medic into his tight-knit unit raised concerns about unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. During their first briefing, Harrison studied Rodriguez carefully. Her medical credentials were impeccable, and her performance reviews consistently rated her as exceptional. But credentials on paper were different from performance under fire, especially the kind of intense, close-quarters combat that SEALs regularly encountered. Harrison made a mental note to keep her assignments focused on base medical duties rather than field operations. Rodriguez understood the skepticism she faced. She had encountered similar attitudes throughout her career, from drill instructors who questioned whether women belonged in combat support roles to fellow soldiers who assumed she had chosen medical service because she wasn't tough enough for other military occupations. Rather than becoming defensive, Rodriguez had learned to let her work speak for itself. Her first week at Chapman involved familiarizing herself with the base's medical facilities and the specific needs of Special Operations Forces. The medical station was smaller but better equipped than what she was used to, with advanced trauma equipment and surgical capabilities that could handle complex battlefield injuries. Rodriguez spent hours studying the layout, memorizing where every piece of equipment was stored, and reviewing protocols for various emergency scenarios. The SEALs initially kept their distance, polite but reserved in their interactions. Rodriguez understood this wasn't personal animosity, but rather the natural caution of a unit that depended on absolute trust and seamless coordination for survival. She focused on proving her competence through small interactions, treating minor injuries with professionalism and efficiency, and demonstrating her knowledge during medical briefings. Petty Officer First Class David "Tank" Thompson was the first to warm up to Rodriguez. A massive man from rural Montana, Thompson had been injured in a training accident and spent several days under Rodriguez's care. He was impressed by her thorough approach to treatment and her ability to manage pain effectively while maintaining alertness necessary for continued training. "She knows her stuff," Thompson told Harrison after his treatment. "And she doesn't coddle you or act like you're made of glass. Treats you like a soldier, not like a patient." This endorsement from one of his most respected team members gave Harrison pause. Thompson was notoriously difficult to impress and had little patience for medical personnel who didn't understand the unique demands of special operations. If he was vouching for Rodriguez, perhaps Harrison's initial concerns were unfounded. The turning point in Rodriguez's integration came during a routine training exercise. The SEALs were practicing urban combat scenarios in a mock village constructed on the base when one of the training explosives malfunctioned. Sergeant Mike "Bulldog" Burke was caught in the blast radius and suffered severe lacerations and a potential concussion. Rodriguez was in the medical station when the emergency call came through. Without hesitation, she grabbed her trauma kit and sprinted toward the training area. The scene that greeted her was chaotic, with dust still settling and team members shouting conflicting information about Burke's condition. Rodriguez quickly assessed the situation, took charge of the medical response, and began treating Burke's injuries. What impressed the SEALs wasn't just Rodriguez's medical skills, though those were clearly exceptional. It was her calm demeanor under pressure and her ability to take control of a volatile situation. She directed team members to assist with specific tasks, maintained constant communication with Burke to monitor his cognitive function, and coordinated evacuation procedures with the efficiency of a seasoned combat veteran. Burke's injuries turned out to be serious, but not life-threatening, thanks largely to Rodriguez's quick intervention and skilled treatment. During his recovery, he spoke highly of her performance to anyone who would listen. "I've been treated by a lot of medics over the years," Burke told Harrison. "Rodriguez is as good as any of them, maybe better. She's got steady hands and a steady mind, which is exactly what you want when you're bleeding out." Harrison began to see Rodriguez differently. Her gender became irrelevant compared to her demonstrated competence and professionalism. More importantly, she had earned the respect of his men through her actions rather than her words. This was exactly the kind of performance-based acceptance that the SEAL community valued above all else. As Rodriguez settled into her role at Chapman, she began participating in more operational briefings. Her medical expertise proved valuable in mission planning, particularly in assessing risk factors and preparing for potential casualty scenarios. Harrison found her insights helpful and began including her in discussions about tactical medical support. The other SEALs gradually accepted Rodriguez as part of the team. They appreciated her straightforward communication style and her willingness to push herself physically to meet the demanding standards of special operations support. Rodriguez, for her part, worked to understand the unique culture and operational requirements of the SEAL community. During quiet moments between missions, Rodriguez learned about the men she served alongside. Harrison was a devoted father of 2 young children who carried photos of them everywhere. Thompson had grown up on a cattle ranch and planned to return to Montana after his military service. Burke was working on a college degree in his spare time and hoped to become a teacher. These personal connections deepened the bonds of trust and mutual respect that were essential for effective teamwork. Rodriguez also shared stories about her own background. She spoke about growing up in a military family, her decision to pursue medical training, and her commitment to serving alongside America's finest warriors. The SEALs began to see her not as an outsider who had been imposed on their unit, but as a fellow professional who brought valuable capabilities to their team. One evening, as Rodriguez was updating medical records in the station, Harrison stopped by for what appeared to be a routine check. Their conversation quickly moved beyond administrative matters to deeper questions about mission readiness and medical support capabilities. I have to admit, Harrison said, when I first heard they were assigning a female medic to this unit, I had concerns. Not about your medical skills, but about how it would affect team dynamics and operational effectiveness. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the honesty behind his words. I've faced those questions throughout my career, sir. All I've ever asked for is the opportunity to prove myself through performance rather than assumptions. Harrison smiled. Well, you've certainly done that. The men trust you, and that's not something that comes easily in this community. Trust has to be earned through demonstrated competence and reliability. I understand that, sir, and I appreciate the opportunity to earn that trust. This is exactly the kind of assignment I hoped for when I enlisted as a combat medic. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from headquarters. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity in a valley approximately 50 kilometers from Chapman. A joint operation was being planned for the following week, involving multiple SEAL teams and Afghan Special Forces units. The mission would be complex and potentially dangerous, requiring sophisticated medical support. Harrison looked at Rodriguez thoughtfully. How do you feel about field operations? This mission is going to be different from anything you've done before. It's not a hospital environment or even a standard forward operating base. It's going to be austere, dangerous, and demanding. Rodriguez met his gaze steadily. I'm ready for whatever the mission requires, sir. I've trained for field operations, and I understand the risks involved. If you think I can contribute to mission success, I want to be part of the team. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman buzzed with quiet intensity as maps, satellite images, and intelligence reports covered every available surface. Rodriguez entered to find 12 Navy SEALs, 3 Afghan Special Forces liaisons, and 2 intelligence analysts studying the materials with the focused concentration of professionals preparing for life-or-death decisions. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her as she took her designated seat at the medical planning section of the room. Major Sarah Williams, the operations commanding officer, stood at the front of the room with the bearing of someone accustomed to making complex decisions under pressure. A 20-year Army veteran with multiple combat deployments, Williams had personally requested SEAL support for this mission based on intelligence indicating a high-value target was operating from a remote mountain compound in Helmand Province. Intelligence suggests that Ahmad Shah Mansour, a Taliban bombmaker responsible for at least 15 IED attacks against coalition forces, is currently located at this facility, Williams began, pointing to aerial photographs displayed on the main screen. The compound sits in a valley approximately 2 kilometers from the nearest road, surrounded by steep terrain that provides both natural defense and potential escape routes. Rodriguez studied the images carefully, noting the geographic challenges that would affect medical evacuation procedures. The compound was isolated and defensible, but that same isolation would make it difficult to provide rapid medical support if casualties occurred during the operation. She made mental notes about helicopter landing zones, approach routes, and potential casualty collection points. Lieutenant Commander Harrison stepped forward to outline the tactical plan. We'll be inserting 2 SEAL teams via helicopter under cover of darkness. Alpha Team will establish overwatch positions on the ridgeline to the north, while Bravo Team conducts the actual assault on the compound. Afghan Special Forces will secure the perimeter and prevent enemy escape. The plan was elegant in its simplicity but complex in its execution. Rodriguez could see multiple points where medical intervention might be required, from the initial helicopter insertion to the final extraction. Each phase presented unique challenges for providing effective trauma care under combat conditions. Captain Elena Vasquez, the mission's intelligence officer, provided detailed information about enemy capabilities and likely resistance. Current estimates suggest 12 to 15 Taliban fighters at the compound, armed with small arms and possibly rocket-propelled grenades. The main building appears to be fortified, and we should expect determined resistance once the assault begins. Rodriguez listened carefully to the intelligence briefing, understanding that enemy capabilities would directly affect casualty projections and medical planning requirements. 15 enemy fighters in a fortified position suggested the possibility of sustained combat, which could result in multiple casualties requiring immediate treatment. When called upon to present the medical support plan, Rodriguez stood and addressed the assembled personnel with confidence gained through months of preparation and training. Medical support will be provided at 3 levels, she began. I'll be positioned with the command element to provide immediate trauma care for any casualties. A second medic will remain at the helicopter landing zone to support evacuation procedures. Additionally, a fully equipped trauma team will be standing by at Chapman for advanced surgical intervention if required. Harrison nodded approvingly. Rodriguez's plan was thorough and realistic, accounting for various contingencies while maintaining flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. Her presentation demonstrated both medical expertise and tactical understanding, qualities essential for operating effectively with Special Operations Forces. Sergeant First Class Carlos Spider Martinez, Alpha Team Sniper, raised a question about communication procedures during medical emergencies. A soft-spoken professional from San Antonio, Martinez had worked with many medics over his career and understood the importance of clear protocols during high-stress situations. What's our procedure if someone goes down in the compound and we can't immediately reach the medic? Martinez asked. Are we talking self-aid, buddy aid, or do we try to extract the casualty to Rodriguez's position? Rodriguez appreciated the question and the opportunity to clarify critical procedures. Primary treatment will be self-aid and buddy aid using individual first aid kits. If the casualty is ambulatory or can be moved safely, bring them to my position for advanced treatment. If movement isn't possible due to enemy fire, establish a hasty casualty collection point and maintain communication about the patient's condition until I can reach them. This exchange demonstrated the kind of tactical medical planning that Rodriguez had studied extensively, but never implemented in actual combat conditions. The theoretical knowledge gained through training was about to be tested in the most demanding environment possible. Petty Officer Thompson, whose early acceptance had helped integrate Rodriguez into the unit, asked about pain management protocols for potentially serious injuries. If someone takes a bad hit, and we're looking at a long extraction under fire, what are our options for pain control while maintaining combat effectiveness? We have several options depending on the severity of injury and tactical situation, Rodriguez replied. For conscious casualties with severe pain, we can use controlled doses of morphine or fentanyl that provide relief while preserving cognitive function. For unconscious casualties or those requiring immediate evacuation, we have stronger options available. The level of detail in Rodriguez's responses impressed the assembled personnel. She wasn't just reciting textbook answers, but demonstrating genuine understanding of how medical procedures would be implemented under combat stress. Her preparation showed respect for the mission and the lives of the men she would be supporting. Major Williams shifted the discussion to logistical considerations, including extraction procedures and contingency planning. Weather reports indicate possible sandstorms during our planned extraction window. If visibility becomes a factor, we may need to extend our time on target or modify evacuation procedures. This complication added another layer of complexity to medical planning. Extended time on target would mean increased exposure to enemy reinforcements, while modified evacuation procedures might affect the speed with which serious casualties could reach advanced medical care. Rodriguez made mental adjustments to her planning, considering how equipment loads and treatment protocols might need to change. The briefing continued for nearly 3 hours, covering every aspect of the operation from initial approach to final extraction. Maps were studied and restudied, communication protocols were reviewed, and contingency plans were developed for various scenarios. Rodriguez participated actively in discussions, asking questions that demonstrated her understanding of how medical support integrated with overall tactical planning. When the formal briefing concluded, Harrison asked Rodriguez to remain for additional coordination with team leaders. The conversation that followed would prove crucial for establishing the trust and communication necessary for effective operations under combat conditions. This is your first major operation with a SEAL unit, Harrison observed. How are you feeling about the mission parameters and your role in the overall plan? Rodriguez considered her response carefully. I feel well prepared from a medical standpoint, sir. My concern isn't about my ability to provide quality trauma care under fire. I'm confident in those skills. My question is about integration with team movement and communication procedures during dynamic situations. This was exactly the kind of honest self-assessment that Harrison respected. Rodriguez wasn't claiming to be something she wasn't, but she also wasn't understating her capabilities. She understood her strengths and limitations, which was essential for effective teamwork in high-risk environments. That's a fair concern, Harrison replied. Combat operations are fluid and unpredictable. The plan we just briefed will probably change within minutes of boots on the ground. What matters is your ability to adapt and maintain effective communication with team leaders. Staff Sergeant Burke, who had recovered fully from his training accident, joined the conversation. The key thing is staying calm when everything goes to hell, which it probably will. Plans are important, but flexibility and quick thinking matter more when bullets start flying. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the wisdom behind Burke's observation. Her hospital experience had taught her to remain calm during medical emergencies, but combat operations would present additional stressors and distractions that would test her composure under pressure. The discussion moved to specific scenarios and how medical support the pre-dawn darkness enveloped forward operating base Chapman as Rodriguez made her final equipment checks. The helicopter rotors were already spinning, creating a thunderous noise that made communication impossible without headsets. Around her, 12 Navy SEALs moved with the practiced efficiency of warriors who had conducted hundreds of similar operations. But Rodriguez could sense the underlying tension that accompanied every combat mission. Lieutenant Commander Harrison approached Rodriguez as she secured her medical kit to her gear harness. Even through the noise of the helicopters, his voice carried clearly through their communication headsets. Remember, stay close to me during the initial assault. Once we establish security, you'll have more freedom to move where medical support is needed. Rodriguez nodded, checking her rifle one final time before following Harrison toward the waiting Black Hawk helicopter. The aircraft was configured for combat insertion, with minimal seating and maximum space for personnel and equipment. As she strapped herself into her designated position, Rodriguez felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that preceded dangerous operations. The flight to the target area took 45 minutes, following a route designed to avoid known enemy positions and potential anti-aircraft threats. Rodriguez used the time to review medical procedures and mentally prepare for the challenges ahead. Through the helicopter's small windows, she could see the rugged Afghan landscape passing below in shades of gray and black under the pre-dawn sky. Petty Officer Thompson sat across from Rodriguez, his massive frame somehow managing to look relaxed despite the confined space and approaching danger. Thompson had been on dozens of similar missions and understood the importance of conserving mental and physical energy for the intense activity that lay ahead. First time jumping into a hot LZ? Thompson asked through the intercom system. First time with a SEAL unit, Rodriguez replied. I've been on medical evacuation missions under fire, but nothing quite like this. Thompson grinned. It's like being a medic in a hospital, except the hospital is shooting back and trying to kill everyone inside. Despite the grim humor, Rodriguez appreciated Thompson's attempt to ease her pre-mission nerves. She had learned that dark humor was a common coping mechanism among combat veterans, a way of acknowledging danger while maintaining psychological resilience. As the helicopter approached the landing zone, Harrison moved through the cabin, making final coordination with team leaders. The plan called for a rapid insertion followed by immediate movement toward the target compound. Speed and surprise would be critical factors in preventing enemy reinforcement and maintaining tactical advantage. 2 minutes out, the pilot announced through the aircraft's intercom system. Intelligence reports no change in enemy disposition. Weather is clear with light winds from the southwest. Rodriguez felt her heart rate increase as the helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone. Through the windows, she could see the rocky terrain that would provide both cover and obstacles during their approach to the target. The compound itself was still not visible, hidden behind a ridge approximately 1 kilometer from their insertion point. The landing was textbook perfect, with the helicopter touching down just long enough for personnel to disembark before immediately departing for the safety of higher altitude. Rodriguez found herself standing in a small clearing surrounded by scrub vegetation and rocky outcroppings, with the SEAL team already beginning their tactical movement toward the target. Harrison's voice came through her earpiece as the team began moving in tactical formation. Alpha Team is moving to overwatch positions. Bravo Team will begin approach in 5 minutes. Rodriguez, stay with the command element and be ready to move quickly if we have casualties. The approach to the compound took nearly 30 minutes as the teams moved carefully through terrain that offered concealment but also potential ambush sites. Rodriguez stayed close to Harrison, trying to balance situational awareness with preparation for potential medical emergencies. Every shadow could conceal an enemy fighter, and every sound might indicate detection by hostile forces. Alpha Team reached their overwatch positions without incident and reported clear fields of fire covering the compound's main approaches. Through her night vision equipment, Rodriguez could see the target building approximately 400 meters away, a rectangular structure with thick walls and small windows that suggested it had been built with defense in mind. Compound appears quiet, reported Sergeant Martinez from his sniper position. No visible sentries, but thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures inside the main building, estimating 10 to 12 personnel based on movement patterns. Harrison acknowledged the report and signaled for Bravo Team to begin their final approach. Rodriguez watched as 8 SEALs moved through the darkness like ghosts, their movements coordinated and purposeful despite the challenging terrain. Everything was proceeding according to plan, which made Rodriguez both hopeful and suspicious that complications might be imminent. The first sign of trouble came from an unexpected direction. Instead of enemy resistance from the compound, the threat emerged from a hidden position on the team's left flank. Rodriguez heard the distinctive crack of rifle fire before Harrison's urgent voice filled her earpiece. Contact left. Multiple shooters in the rocks. The carefully planned operation suddenly became a chaotic firefight as enemy fighters opened fire from concealed positions that intelligence had failed to identify. The Taliban had anticipated the coalition approach and prepared an ambush designed to catch the attackers in crossfire between the compound and the hidden positions. Rodriguez immediately sought cover behind a large boulder as bullets struck the ground around her position. Her medical training had prepared her for treating casualties under fire, but the intensity of combat was unlike anything she had experienced in hospital emergency rooms or training exercises. Martinez, can you engage the shooters in the rocks? Harrison's voice carried the calm authority of a leader maintaining control despite rapidly changing circumstances. Negative, I don't have angle from current position, Martinez replied. I'm moving to alternate position, but need 2 minutes to get there. Those 2 minutes might as well have been 2 hours as the firefight intensified. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 enemy positions, creating a deadly crossfire that pinned down the SEAL teams and prevented movement toward either the compound or better tactical positions. The first casualty call came from Bravo team leader, Staff Sergeant Jake "Cowboy" Williams, a tough Texan with 15 years of special operations experience. Man down. Peterson's hit bad. Need medical support immediately. Rodriguez's training took over as adrenaline sharpened her focus to laser-like intensity. Where's your position? Can you move Peterson to cover? Negative, we're pinned down behind rocks about 50 meters from the compound. Peterson took multiple rounds to the chest and leg. He's losing blood fast. Rodriguez looked at Harrison, understanding that reaching Peterson would require movement across open ground under enemy fire. This was exactly the kind of scenario that medical training had prepared her for, but theory was very different from reality when bullets were flying overhead. I need to get to Peterson, Rodriguez told Harrison. He won't survive without immediate intervention. Harrison studied the tactical situation through his night vision equipment. Enemy fire was coming from multiple directions, making movement extremely dangerous for anyone not in hard cover. But Peterson was one of his men, and Rodriguez was the only person who could save his life. Thompson, Burke, lay down suppressive fire toward the rocks. Martinez, whatever position you can find, start engaging targets. Rodriguez, move fast and stay low. I'll be right behind you. Rodriguez checked her medical kit one final time and prepared to move across what military personnel call the fatal funnel, open ground where enemy fighters had clear fields of fire. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it despite the gunfire echoing off the surrounding rocks. The sprint to Peterson's position became a surreal experience of time dilation and hyper-awareness. Rodriguez could hear bullets snapping past her head as she ran in a crouch, trying to make herself as small a target as possible while maintaining speed across the rocky terrain. Behind her, she could hear Harrison's footsteps and the encouraging sound of suppressive fire from Thompson and Burke. Peterson's condition was immediately obvious as Rodriguez reached the small depression where Bravo team had taken cover. The young SEAL was conscious but pale, with obvious bullet wounds to his chest and thigh that were bleeding heavily despite the team's attempts at emergency treatment. "Talk to me, Peterson," Rodriguez said as she began her assessment. "Where does it hurt the most?" "Chest feels like it's on fire," Peterson gasped. "Can't catch my breath." Rodriguez's hands moved quickly over Peterson's body, checking for entrance and exit wounds while assessing the severity of his injuries. The chest wounds were serious, but hadn't penetrated the lung cavity, while the leg wound had damaged muscle tissue, but missed major blood vessels. These were survivable injuries if treated quickly and properly. Working under fire required a different approach to trauma care than hospital treatment. Every procedure had to be faster, simpler, and more focused on immediate life-saving measures rather than comprehensive treatment. Rodriguez applied pressure dressings to control bleeding while simultaneously establishing access for fluid replacement and pain management. "Bleeding is under control," Rodriguez reported to Harrison. "Peterson's stable enough to move, but he needs evacuation as soon as possible. The leg wound will prevent him from walking out on his own." The tactical situation remained critical as enemy fire continued from multiple positions. Martinez had reached an alternate sniper position and was engaging targets, but the enemy fighters were well concealed and difficult to eliminate. The operation was rapidly becoming a casualty evacuation mission rather than the planned assault on the compound. Rodriguez's attention was suddenly diverted by a new crisis. Thompson's voice crackled through her earpiece with urgency that cut through the background noise of gunfire. "Burke's down. Took an RPG blast, and he's not responding." The situation had just become exponentially more complicated. Rodriguez now had 2 serious casualties requiring immediate medical attention, but they were separated by 50 meters of ground that was under constant enemy observation and fire. Every instinct told her to stay with Peterson and ensure his survival, but Burke might be dying while she delayed. "Harrison, I need to assess Burke's condition. Can anyone else provide medical support for Peterson while I'm gone?" "Negative. You're our only qualified medic." "How long can Peterson wait?" Rodriguez looked at Peterson's condition again, balancing medical needs against tactical realities. The young SEAL was stable for now, but any movement or additional stress could worsen his injuries. Burke's condition was completely unknown, but RPG blasts often caused catastrophic trauma that required immediate intervention. "Peterson's stable for 15 minutes if he stays still and doesn't lose more blood. I need to check Burke and see what we're dealing with." Harrison nodded grimly. "Thompson, Williams, maintain security around Peterson. Rodriguez, I'm going with you to Burke's position. Move fast and stay low." The second sprint across open ground was even more terrifying than the first as Rodriguez became acutely aware of how exposed she was to enemy fire. Taliban fighters were specifically targeting anyone moving between positions, and several bullets struck the ground close enough to spray her with rock fragments and dust. Burke's condition was worse than Rodriguez had feared. The massive SEAL was unconscious with obvious head trauma and possible internal injuries from the RPG explosion. Blood was flowing from his ears, suggesting a serious concussion or skull fracture that could prove fatal without immediate advanced medical care. Rodriguez's world narrowed to the immediate demands of keeping 2 critically wounded SEALs alive, while enemy reinforcements closed in from multiple directions. The tactical situation had deteriorated beyond anyone's worst-case scenarios, transforming what should have been a surgical strike into a desperate fight for for survival against overwhelming odds. Burke remained unconscious as Rodriguez monitored his breathing and checked his pupil responses for signs of increasing brain pressure. The massive seal's condition was deteriorating despite her interventions, and she knew that without immediate surgical intervention, he would not survive the next hour. Meanwhile, Peterson was growing weaker from blood loss despite the pressure dressings and for fluids she had administered. Harrison's voice cut through the chaos with the calm authority that had made him an effective leader through dozens of combat operations. All teams, prepare for emergency extraction. Enemy reinforcements will be here in 3 minutes, and we cannot defend against 2 squads from our current positions. The problem was that both casualties were too seriously injured to move quickly across the rough terrain to potential helicopter landing zones. Rodriguez faced an impossible choice between providing medical care and tactical movement, either of which could prove fatal if executed incorrectly. "Harrison, we have a major problem," Rodriguez said as she continued working on Burke. "Peterson can move with assistance, but Burke is unconscious and any rough movement could kill him. We need to either find a closer landing zone or hold this position until medical evacuation arrives." Martinez's urgent voice crackled through the radio from his overwatch position. "Multiple vehicles approaching fast from the east. I count at least 15 fighters dismounting and moving to flanking positions. They're trying to surround us." The approaching Taliban fighters had clearly coordinated their response to trap the SEAL teams in a kill zone between the original ambush positions and the reinforcing elements. Rodriguez understood that their survival now depended on breaking contact and reaching extraction points before being completely surrounded. Thompson appeared at Rodriguez's position, his normally cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. "Doc, I can carry Peterson if you can handle Burke. We need to move now, or we're all going to die in this valley." Rodriguez looked at Burke's condition again, knowing that moving him might cause fatal brain trauma, but also understanding that staying meant certain death for everyone. Military medical training emphasized saving the maximum number of lives possible, even if individual casualties had to be sacrificed for the greater good. "Burke's too critical to move without proper spinal stabilization," Rodriguez said. "But if we stay here, we all die. Help me get him secured for transport, and pray that his injuries can survive the movement." Working with Thompson's assistance, Rodriguez used her remaining medical supplies to immobilize Burke's head and neck as much as possible given their limited resources and time constraints. It was far from optimal medical care, but it was the best possible compromise between Burke's medical needs and the tactical requirement for immediate evacuation. The sound of approaching enemy vehicles grew louder as Rodriguez and Thompson prepared to move their casualties. Harrison had already called for emergency helicopter extraction, but the aircraft would need several minutes to reach their location, and the Taliban reinforcements would arrive before the helicopters. "All teams, enemy contact imminent," Harrison announced. "Prepare to bound back toward extraction zone Alpha." "Martinez, how much longer can you provide overwatch?" "Ammunition is getting low, but I can cover your movement for maybe 10 minutes, Martinez replied. "After that, I'll have to displace or risk being overrun." Rodriguez felt a cold certainty settle over her as she realized the tactical mathematics of their situation. The SEAL teams could probably fight their way to the extraction zone, but carrying 2 seriously wounded casualties would slow their movement and make them vulnerable to enemy fire. Standard military doctrine suggested that difficult choices might have to be made about which casualties could be saved. The first enemy reinforcements appeared as muzzle flashes approximately 300 meters away, immediately opening fire on the American positions. Rodriguez found herself in the surreal situation of providing medical care while bullets snapped overhead and enemy fighters maneuvered for better firing positions. "Rodriguez, we need to move now." Harrison's command carried the urgency of a leader who understood that delay meant death for his entire team. "Give me 30 seconds to stabilize Burke for movement," Rodriguez replied, working frantically to secure 4 lines and ensure that her medical equipment wouldn't interfere with transportation. Every second counted, but rushing could cause fatal complications for either casualty. Peterson struggled to his feet with Thompson's assistance, his face pale but determined to move under his own power despite his serious leg wound. The young SEAL understood that his survival depended on reaching the extraction zone, and he was prepared to push through pain and weakness to avoid becoming a burden on his teammates. Rodriguez finished securing Burke for transport just as enemy fire intensified from multiple directions. The Taliban fighters were coordinating their assault to prevent American escape while maintaining pressure from their original ambush positions. The crossfire was becoming deadly accurate as enemy shooters found their range. "Moving!" Harrison shouted as the SEAL teams began their tactical withdrawal under fire. Rodriguez found herself in a nightmare scenario that no medical training could have fully prepared her for. While Thompson carried Peterson and Williams carried Burke, she had to provide covering fire with her rifle while simultaneously monitoring both casualties for signs of medical crisis that could prove fatal. The retreat toward the extraction zone became a running firefight as Taliban forces pursued aggressively, trying to prevent the Americans from reaching helicopter pickup points. Rodriguez had trained with her rifle extensively, but shooting at human targets while under fire was vastly different from training exercises or target practice. Her first shot at an enemy fighter missed completely as adrenaline affected her aim and breathing control. Rodriguez forced herself to slow down and apply the marksmanship fundamentals she had learned, despite bullets striking the rocks around her position. The second shot found its target as an enemy fighter exposed himself while maneuvering for a better firing angle. Rodriguez watched the Taliban fighter fall and felt a mixture of satisfaction and revulsion that she had never experienced before. Taking a life was something she had hoped to avoid as a medical professional, but combat had forced her into situations beyond her original expectations. "Good shooting, Doc," Thompson called out as he helped Peterson navigate rough terrain while maintaining their rapid pace toward the extraction zone. "Keep those bastards' heads down." Rodriguez discovered that shooting while moving was even more difficult than shooting from static positions. The physical demands of carrying medical equipment across rocky terrain while wearing full combat gear tested her endurance and coordination to their limits. But adrenaline and determination kept her moving as enemy fire continued from multiple directions. Burke regained consciousness as Williams carried him toward the extraction zone, immediately beginning to struggle against the restraints that Rodriguez had applied for spinal protection. The big SEAL was disoriented and combative, not understanding why he couldn't move freely and potentially dangerous to both himself and his rescuer. "Burke's awake and fighting," Williams reported. "He's trying to break free and could hurt himself worse." Rodriguez had to make split-second decisions about medication while running under fire and trying to provide accurate suppressive fire against pursuing enemies. Burke needed sedation to prevent him from worsening his own injuries, but too much medication could depress his breathing and prove fatal given his probable brain injury. Drawing a careful dose of sedative, Rodriguez administered the injection while Williams continued carrying Burke toward the helicopter landing zone. The medication would calm Burke without completely suppressing his respiratory drive, but it was another medical gamble in a situation filled with impossible choices. The sound of approaching helicopters provided the first hopeful note in what had been an increasingly desperate situation. But the aircraft would need time to land and load casualties, and the Taliban fighters were closing distance rapidly as they pursued the retreating Americans. "Extraction birds are 2 minutes out," Harrison announced. "We need to hold the landing zone until they can get in and out safely." Rodriguez realized that the most dangerous part of their ordeal was still ahead. Landing zones were natural targets for enemy mortars and rocket-propelled grenades, and the helicopters would be vulnerable during the loading process. Everyone's survival depended on maintaining security while accomplishing medical evacuation under fire. Martinez had displaced from his original sniper position, but continued engaging targets as the Taliban pursuit intensified. "Enemy reinforcements are still coming," he reported. "I count at least 20 fighters moving to cut off your route to the LZ." The SEAL teams reached the extraction zone with minutes to spare, but their tactical situation remained precarious as enemy forces positioned themselves to attack the landing helicopters. Rodriguez used the brief respite to reassess both casualties and prepare them for helicopter transport. Peterson's condition had worsened during the movement as blood loss and physical stress took their toll on his already weakened system. Rodriguez quickly established a second line and administered additional medications to stabilize his blood pressure and heart rate. The young SEAL remained conscious, but was clearly struggling with the physical demands of their escape. Burke's sedation was working effectively, keeping him calm enough for safe transport while maintaining adequate breathing and circulation. However, Rodriguez could see signs of increasing brain pressure that suggested his head injury was more serious than initially assessed. He needed neurosurgery within hours to prevent permanent disability or death. The approaching helicopters announced their arrival with the distinctive sound of twin rotor systems that promised salvation, but also attracted enemy attention. Rodriguez could see Taliban fighters repositioning to attack the aircraft during their most vulnerable moments of landing and takeoff. "Incoming," Martinez shouted as enemy rocket-propelled grenades streaked toward the landing zone. Rodriguez threw herself over Peterson's prone form as explosions erupted around the helicopter landing zone. Shrapnel whistled overhead as dust and debris filled the air, making visibility nearly impossible. The medical demands of treating casualties under direct fire tested every aspect of her training and character. When the dust settled, Rodriguez could see that the lead helicopter had sustained damage but was still functional. The pilot was attempting to land despite continued enemy fire, demonstrating the kind of courage that characterized military aviation in combat situations. "Load casualties immediately," Harrison commanded as the helicopter touched down. Rodriguez coordinated the loading process while providing suppressive fire against Taliban positions that were trying to prevent the evacuation. Peterson was loaded first due to his ability to assist with his own movement, followed by Burke, who required careful handling due to his spinal injuries. As the helicopter prepared for takeoff, Rodriguez made the decision that would define her legacy with the SEAL community. Instead of boarding the aircraft for safety, she chose to remain on the ground to continue fighting alongside the men who had accepted her as part of their team. "Rodriguez, get on the bird," Harrison commanded. "Negative," Rodriguez replied as she reloaded her rifle. Rodriguez's decision to remain on the ground with the SEAL team rather than evacuate with the wounded transformed her from medical support personnel into a full combat participant. As the evacuation helicopter disappeared into the dawn sky, carrying Peterson and Burke to safety, she found herself facing the most intense 13 minutes of combat that any of the SEALs had ever witnessed. The Taliban forces had suffered casualties during the initial firefight, but continued pressing their attack with reinforcements arriving from multiple directions. Rodriguez counted at least 30 enemy fighters visible from her position, with more likely approaching under cover of the rocky terrain that dominated the valley landscape. Harrison quickly assessed their tactical situation as enemy forces maneuvered to surround the remaining Americans. "We're heavily outnumbered and low on ammunition," he reported through tactical radio networks. "Extraction helicopter won't be back for 20 minutes, and we can't hold this position against this many fighters." Rodriguez checked her remaining medical supplies and ammunition, understanding that the next 20 minutes would test every aspect of her training and character. Her medical kit was nearly empty after treating Peterson and Burke, but her rifle still contained several full magazines that might prove more valuable than bandages in the immediate future. Martinez continued providing sniper support from an elevated position approximately 200 meters away, but his ammunition was running critically low after prolonged engagement with enemy forces. "I've got maybe 20 rounds left," he reported. "After that, I'll have to displace or switch to my sidearm." Thompson had taken shrapnel from one of the rocket-propelled grenade explosions, but remained combat effective despite minor wounds to his arms and face. The massive SEAL positioned himself behind a large boulder and began methodical aimed fire at Taliban fighters who exposed themselves while maneuvering for better positions. Williams coordinated defensive fires while maintaining communication with extraction aircraft that were working to return as quickly as possible. The team leader understood that their survival depended on ammunition conservation and accurate shooting until helicopter support could extract them from an increasingly untenable position. Rodriguez found herself assigned to cover the team's left flank, where Taliban fighters were attempting to infiltrate close enough for effective small arms fire. The medical training that had taught her to preserve life was now being applied in reverse as she deliberately engaged enemy combatants to protect her teammates. Her first engagement came as 3 Taliban fighters attempted to move between rock formations to reach a position that would allow flanking fire on the American defensive perimeter. Rodriguez tracked their movement through her rifle scope, waiting for clear shots that would neutralize the threat without wasting precious ammunition. The leading fighter exposed himself for less than 2 seconds as he moved between cover points, but Rodriguez's shot struck him center mass and dropped him immediately. The other 2 fighters hesitated, unsure whether to continue their advance or seek better cover against what they now recognized as accurate American defensive fire. "Nice shot, Doc," Thompson called out between his own engagements. "Keep them honest on that side, and we might make it out of this mess alive." Rodriguez's second engagement tested her resolve as she faced a Taliban fighter who couldn't have been more than 17 years old. The young enemy combatant was attempting to maneuver with an AK-47 rifle, his movements showing inexperience, but also desperate courage that reminded Rodriguez uncomfortably of the young American soldiers she had treated in field hospitals. The moral complexity of combat struck Rodriguez powerfully as she aimed at another human being who was simply fighting for his own cause and survival. Her medical training emphasized preserving life regardless of politics or nationality, but the immediate tactical situation required her to take life to protect her teammates and herself. Her shot was clean and quick, ending the young fighter's life instantly. Rodriguez felt no satisfaction in the kill, but neither did she feel the revulsion she had expected. Combat had a way of clarifying moral choices through the simple mathematics of survival. The intensity of enemy fire increased as Taliban fighters realized they faced skilled marksmen rather than easy targets. Bullets struck the rocks around Rodriguez's position with increasing frequency as enemy shooters adjusted their aim based on her muzzle flashes and movement between firing positions. Rodriguez discovered that combat shooting was vastly different from the marksmanship training she had completed during her medical corps preparation. Moving targets, return fire, and the physical stress of prolonged combat all affected her accuracy and decision-making in ways that no training exercise could replicate. But her medical training proved unexpectedly valuable in combat situations. The hand-eye coordination developed through years of precise medical procedures translated into steady shooting despite adrenaline and stress. The ability to make quick decisions under pressure served her well in identifying targets and engaging them effectively. Martinez's ammunition finally ran out completely, forcing him to abandon his sniper position and join the main defensive perimeter with only his sidearm for protection. The loss of his long-range fire support significantly worsened their tactical situation as Taliban fighters became more aggressive in their assault. "Rodriguez, can you take over long-range engagements?" Harrison asked. "You're the best shooter we have left with enough ammunition to make a difference." Rodriguez moved to Martinez's former position, carrying her rifle and remaining ammunition across terrain that was under constant enemy observation. The sprint required precise timing to avoid exposure during movement, but she reached the elevated position without drawing effective enemy fire. From the sniper position, Rodriguez could see the full scope of their tactical situation for the first time. Taliban fighters had nearly completed their encirclement of the American position, with groups maneuvering from 3 different directions to prevent escape routes. The situation was desperate, but not hopeless if she could disrupt enemy coordination through accurate long-range fire. Her first shot from the elevated position struck a Taliban commander who was directing the assault from a position he thought was safe from American fire. The 400-meter shot required precise range estimation and wind compensation, but Rodriguez's medical training in precise measurement and calculation served her well in making the necessary adjustments. The loss of their commander caused temporary confusion among the Taliban fighters, providing a brief respite that Harrison used to redistribute ammunition and coordinate defensive fires. Every minute of delay increased their chances of survival as extraction helicopters worked to return with additional support. Rodriguez's second long-range engagement targeted a Taliban fighter with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher who was positioning himself to destroy the American defensive position with a single shot. The 350-meter shot was complicated by wind and the target's movement, but Rodriguez's patience and marksmanship training paid off as her bullet found its mark. The destruction of the RPG threat significantly improved their defensive posture, but ammunition was becoming critically low across the entire team. Rodriguez had started the mission with 180 rounds of rifle ammunition and was down to her final magazine after prolonged combat. Thompson's voice carried grim humor despite their desperate situation. "Doc, I don't know what they taught you in medical school, but you shoot better than most infantry soldiers I've served with." Rodriguez was reloading her rifle when she noticed movement in a ravine that none of the team members could observe from their current positions. A squad of Taliban fighters was using the depression to approach within 50 meters of the American perimeter, positioning themselves for a devastating close-range assault. "Contact close. Squad-sized element in the ravine to our 6 o'clock," Rodriguez announced as she shifted her rifle toward the new threat. The Taliban fighters realized they had been detected and immediately opened fire from their concealed positions, creating a new axis of threat that forced the SEALs to divide their attention between multiple enemy groups. Rodriguez found herself engaging targets at ranges as close as 30 meters, using her rifle like a designated marksman while coordinating her fire with the other team members. Her medical training proved valuable in unexpected ways as Rodriguez used her knowledge of human anatomy to make precise shots that would immediately incapacitate enemy fighters rather than merely wounding them. The clean, quick kills prevented wounded Taliban fighters from continuing to participate in the firefight while conserving ammunition through precise shot placement. The ravine engagement became the most intense close combat experience of Rodriguez's life as Taliban fighters closed to grenade-throwing distance before being stopped by accurate American defensive fire. She found herself shooting at targets so close that she could see individual facial features and expressions, making the human cost of combat impossible to ignore. When the extraction helicopters finally appeared on the horizon, Rodriguez had been in continuous combat for exactly 13 minutes since choosing to remain with the SEAL team. In that brief span of time, she had killed 11 enemy fighters, disrupted multiple Taliban assault attempts, and proved herself in combat to a degree that impressed seasoned special operations veterans. The helicopter extraction proceeded without incident as Taliban forces had been sufficiently disrupted by American defensive fire to prevent effective interference with the landing and loading process. As Rodriguez boarded the aircraft alongside her SEAL teammates, she felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and profound change in her understanding of herself and her capabilities. Harrison sat beside Rodriguez during the flight back to Forward Operating Base Chapman, both of them too emotionally and physically drained for extensive conversation. But the SEAL commander's respect for Rodriguez was evident in his simple statement. "You earned your place in this unit today. Document. No one will ever question whether you belong here again." The official after-action report would note that Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had engaged enemy combatants in direct fire combat for 13 minutes, resulting in 11 confirmed kills and the successful defense of a SEAL extraction under overwhelming odds. Her actions during this engagement would earn her the Combat Medical Badge and the respect of every special operations warrior who heard the story. More importantly, Rodriguez had proven to herself and others that courage and effectiveness in combat weren't determined by gender, size, or background, but by training, character, and the willingness to risk everything for the mission and teammates. Her 13 minutes of combat had changed not only her own life, but also perceptions throughout the special operations community about who could serve effectively in the most demanding military roles. Peterson and Burke both made full recoveries thanks to Rodriguez's medical interventions during the mission. Peterson returned to active duty within 6 months and specifically requested to serve with Rodriguez on future operations. Burke required extensive rehabilitation from his head injury, but eventually returned to limited duty status, crediting Rodriguez with saving his life through her quick medical response under fire. Rodriguez continued serving with SEAL units for the remainder of her deployment, participating in dozens of additional operations where her unique combination of medical expertise and proven combat effectiveness made her an invaluable team member. Her story became legendary within the special operations community, inspiring other female service members to pursue roles that had previously been considered beyond their capabilities. The 13 minutes that changed everything became a defining moment not just for Rodriguez personally, but for military policies regarding women in combat roles. Her documented performance under the most extreme conditions provided evidence that gender was irrelevant compared to individual qualifications, training, and character. Rodriguez had not only earned her combat medical badge, she had opened doors for future generations of women who would serve alongside America's finest warriors. Men need medical support, and there are more Taliban coming. I'm staying to fight. The helicopter departed with its precious cargo of wounded SEALs, but the firefight was far from over as enemy reinforcements continued arriving from multiple directions. Rodriguez had chosen to stay and fight, transforming from medical support personnel into a combat warrior in the span of 13 minutes that would change everything the SEALs thought they knew about courage under fire. Rodriguez's medical training took over as she began emergency treatment procedures. Burke's breathing was irregular and shallow, indicating potential brain injury or internal bleeding that was beyond her ability to treat in field conditions. She could stabilize him temporarily, but he needed surgical intervention within hours to have any chance of survival. Working frantically, Rodriguez established airway management and for access while monitoring Burke's vital signs for any indication of improvement or deterioration. The Big SEAL remained unconscious, but his pulse was stronger and his breathing became more regular as Rodriguez's interventions took effect. Burke's in critical condition, Rodriguez reported to Harrison. Possible traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding. I can keep him stable temporarily, but he needs immediate evacuation to a trauma center with surgical capabilities. The tactical situation was rapidly spiraling beyond the mission's original parameters. 2 serious casualties, continued enemy fire from multiple positions, and the realization that the planned assault was no longer feasible created a complex problem that required immediate command decisions. Harrison weighed options that all carried significant risks. Calling for emergency evacuation would expose helicopter crews to the same enemy fire that had wounded Peterson and Burke. Remaining in position might allow enemy reinforcements to arrive and completely overwhelm the outnumbered SEAL teams. Moving to alternate positions might worsen the casualties' conditions beyond Rodriguez's ability to treat. The decision was made for them as Martinez's voice cut through tactical radio traffic with deadly urgency. Enemy reinforcements approaching from the east. Multiple vehicles, estimated 2 squads of fighters, ETA 5 minutes. Rodriguez understood that the mission had just transformed from rescue to survival. With 2 serious casualties requiring constant medical attention and enemy reinforcements approaching rapidly, the SEAL teams faced their most dangerous situation in years of combat operations. Would be coordinated during different phases of the operation. Harrison walked through several what-if situations, testing Rodriguez's understanding of tactical procedures and her ability to make appropriate medical decisions under various constraints. What if Burke takes shrapnel to the abdomen during the initial breach, but we're still taking effective enemy fire from the compound? Harrison asked, how do you balance immediate medical needs against ongoing tactical requirements? Priority is to stop life-threatening bleeding while maintaining our ability to complete the mission, Rodriguez responded. I'd move Burke to covered position, apply emergency bleeding control measures, establish for access if possible, and coordinate with you about whether we can continue the assault or need to modify our approach based on his condition. Harrison was impressed by Rodriguez's answer. She understood that medical considerations couldn't override tactical requirements, but she also recognized when medical emergencies might affect overall mission capability. This kind of balanced thinking was essential for operating effectively with Special Operations Forces. As the planning session concluded, Rodriguez felt more confident about her integration with the SEAL team. The detailed discussion had clarified roles, responsibilities, and procedures while building the personal relationships necessary for effective teamwork. She understood that tomorrow's mission would test everything she had learned, but she also knew she was as prepared as possible for the challenges ahead. That evening, Rodriguez spent time with her equipment, checking and rechecking every piece of medical gear that would accompany her on the mission. Her trauma kit contained advanced supplies for treating gunshot wounds, explosive injuries, and other combat trauma. Weight was always a consideration for helicopter-inserted operations, so every item had been selected for maximum effectiveness and versatility. She also reviewed her personal equipment, ensuring that her rifle was clean and properly zeroed, her communications gear was functional, and her protective equipment was properly fitted. While her primary role was medical support, Rodriguez understood that she might need to defend herself and her patients if the tactical situation deteriorated. The night before the mission, Rodriguez called her family in El Paso. Her parents had always worried about her deployment to Afghanistan, but they also understood her commitment to serving alongside America's finest warriors. The conversation was brief and cheerful, focusing on family news rather than the dangerous mission that lay ahead. As Rodriguez prepared for sleep, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From her childhood dreams of military service to her current role supporting Navy SEALs, every step had prepared her for tomorrow's challenges. She felt ready to prove that she belonged in this elite community, not because of any special accommodation, but because of her demonstrated competence and professionalism. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of her training, preparation, and character. Rodriguez fell asleep confident in her abilities, but knowing that combat operations would demand everything she had to give and more. Harrison nodded slowly. Something in Rodriguez's demeanor convinced him that she was indeed ready for the challenges ahead. Her confidence wasn't bravado or false bravado, but the quiet assurance of a professional who had prepared thoroughly for this moment. "All right," Harrison said. "You'll be part of the medical support team for this operation. We'll be conducting final briefings over the next few days, and I want you involved in all planning sessions. This is going to test everyone's abilities, including yours." As Harrison left the medical station, Rodriguez felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This would be her first major field operation with a SEAL unit, and she knew that her performance would be scrutinized carefully. More importantly, she understood that lives would depend on her ability to provide effective medical support under combat conditions. Rodriguez spent the evening reviewing her training materials and checking her equipment once again. She thought about the path that had led her to this moment, from her childhood dreams of military service to her current role supporting America's elite special forces. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself, but tonight she felt ready for whatever lay ahead.